Tonight, we are talking about shipping, its impacts on climate change, and what we can do about it, I suppose. Our speaker is Professor Simon Baughen from the University of Swansea. So, Simon, I will stop sharing my slides now, and if you would like to bring yours up, then you can take it away.
Okay, I'm going to be doing that, and I'm going to make it bigger. I think we're in business.
In business, perfect.
Yes, excellent. Good evening. I'm going to be talking about something about international shipping, which is my speciality, and it's become very much a sort of new area for me. Really, out of my concern about global warming and the current climate change, as a member of the public, a concerned citizen. And I have been focusing on the role of international shipping in contributing to climate change. It's something which hasn't really had much public attention, and it's starting to get more public attention. And one of the things Dorian mentioned to me when he asked me to do this talk, I was originally scheduled to do it a year ago, and I was going to be doing it in person, and then coronavirus hit, and obviously that never happened. And he was asking, have things changed much? If things have changed much, you can perhaps talk about something else. But yeah, things have changed quite a lot in the field about how we react to the uncounted emissions which are happening from international shipping. And there have been some very important developments which have happened since then. And I'll come on to those as we go through the talk. And so there we are, an international container ship with lots of containers, hopefully not stuck in the Suez Canal like the Ever Gift is at the moment. Now, I'm conscious of time. I'm primarily going to be talking about the greenhouse gas impacts of international shipping, the actual emissions which occur when you've got international cargo ships going all over the world, bringing goods here and there. If I get time, I will have a brief focus on the greenhouse gas costs of some of the goods which are brought over through international shipping, and some of the environmentally detrimental effects of producing those goods or using them. So, shipping accounts for 80% of world trade. We're looking at manufactured goods, raw materials, food. It is a large contributor towards the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's probably about 2.7%. So if international shipping was a country, it would probably be in about sixth place. It would be around the status of Germany. And it's not just CO2, carbon dioxide. There are other greenhouse gases and other polluting fueled by liquid nitrogen gas, LNG. And then there's the position of sulfur dioxide. Now, international shipping is outside the international agreements which have been drawn up to deal with climate change. It doesn't feature in Kyoto. It's not featuring in Paris. The Committee on Climate Change in the UK in the autumn of 2019 suggested that the UK government include international shipping as part of its targets under the Climate Change Act. But not surprisingly, in October of that year, the the government decided that it wasn't going to follow that recommendation, but it ought to be left to the appropriate international organizations. And I'll come on to those in a moment. There are international organizations which deal with regulation of international shipping. So shipping's not in the Kyoto scheme, it's not in Paris, it's not an UK Climate Change Act. It all comes down to one United Nations agency, the International Maritime Organization. And here we have got some demonstrators in 2019 who are demonstrating outside the IMO, that's what I'll refer to it as, International Maritime Organization. They've got their headquarters in London on the South Bank, and they are demonstrating. And one of the things they're demonstrating about is, why is the IMO not doing more to regulate shipping, to deal with its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions? So the IMO is the regulatory body, and it's not just pollution. It doesn't just regulate on things like ship safety, it regulates on pollution into the sea, but it also regulates about air pollution. It's done regulation of air pollution since from ships since 1996, and that's where the measures which are being developed by the IMO, that's how it fits into its remit. And only very recently has it started to actually take some sort of faltering steps towards addressing international shipping's substantial contribution to climate change through emission of CO2. It's, in a way, it's a tale of three gases. I've got it misspelt there. Never mind. I'm sure it was spelt like that in Shakespeare's time, so it's probably all right. Carbon dioxide, CO2, that's the obvious greenhouse gas. But there are other pollutants. Sulfur dioxide, now that isn't really a greenhouse gas, but it's certainly not good news for human beings. And there has been some regulation about emission of sulfur dioxide through the IMO. One of the paradoxes, though, is that sulfur dioxide might be actually quite a good thing to have in the atmosphere from the point of view of slowing down the effect of global warming through the emission of CO2. So there's a sort of, you start getting rid of sulfur dioxide, which is great for people's health. But maybe you are increasing global warming by doing so. A bit of a paradox. Then there's nitrogen oxide, which is particularly bad for people's health. It's something which is particularly associated with emissions from cruise ships, and that can be particularly bad when these floating hotels moor up in ports, and they're running their diesel engines to enable them to have these floating cities, essentially. And there's a mass of pollution, particularly sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, and that is not good news for people who live in the adjacent areas on land. And then there's methane. Methane is something which is associated with a fuel called liquid nitrogen gas. There are some cruise ships and there are some container ships which run on liquid nitrogen gas. And the problem is to produce this fuel, there is something called methane slip, that methane gets emitted during the production of, and indeed during the use of this fuel. And one of the things which is being touted is, methane might be, liquid nitrogen gas might be a great great alternative fuel to go to. You know, it's quite easy to just shift to that. It will cut down carbon dioxide emissions by about 25%. So that's helping making things better from greenhouse gas emissions point of view, 25% reduction. And it's also going to virtually eliminate any sulfur dioxide emissions from those ships. But methane is not a good gas to be emitted. It is a very significant contributor to global warming, and really we should be thinking twice about adopting it as a replacement for diesel oil when we're thinking about the shift, which is going to happen if we're going to address emissions from shipping and their effect on the atmosphere. So, Annex 6 is the part of the IMO's structure which deals with air pollution, and I'm just going to briefly go through what the IMO has been doing. It has been producing measures saying that new vessels need to be more energy efficient, and they've been tightening up those measures as time has gone along. There was a tightening up of measures back last autumn, which should be coming into effect fairly soon. But this is for new vessels. What about all the old vessels which are currently plying the seas? They've introduced some reporting obligations whereby you need to report about the emissions from the fuel you've been using on voyages, and you need to report them to the flag state, and they'll be kept confidential. And then in 2018, they decided that they would actually require some specific reduction targets for CO2 emissions. And they've been doing a lot of talk about how they can do that ever since. So what they want to do is to get to a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050, and they're taking 2008 as the comparator year for, so it's going to be 50% reduction by 2050 over 2008 levels. And so to some extent this is quite encouraging, because if you do nothing, the amount of emissions is going to grow substantially by 2050. They've also got some targets as to what they want to happen by 2030. The only way which can meet those targets for reduction is to introduce a mandatory cap on speed. And the shipping industry hates the idea of any mandatory regulation, and it's particularly doesn't like the idea of any cap on speed. But that's the only existing thing which can happen to enable the 2030 targets to be met. You know, just having increased energy efficient for new build ships isn't going to do it. So that's a controversy which is still going on. So the second gas is sulfur dioxide, and following very much in the wake of what the EU has been legislating about the sulfur dioxide, which can be present in marine diesel oil, it introduced what's called the sulfur cap, which got everybody in the shipping industry very excited towards the end of 2019. From the 1st of January 2020, you can't have more than 0.5% sulfur in your fuel oil unless the vessel has got scrubbers. These are basically bits of kit which will extract sulfur from the fuel, and then if you've got a closed loop system, they'll store it and then store all the sort of extracted sulfur, and then you can dispose of that, hopefully in a proper environmentally friendly way when you get to the next port. Or you could have an open loop system, which a lot of the extracted sulfur will just go into the water as opposed to going up into the air. And then on the 1st of March 2020, you weren't allowed to carry any fuel oil as cargo which had over 0.5% sulfur. The EU actually has a tighter restriction on the sulfur content. When vessels are at berth, it should be no more than 0.1% of sulfur in the fuel oil or diesel oil. Interestingly, the maximum requirement for cars is 100 times less. It's 0.001%. The third gas is nitrogen oxide. And there are some interesting statistics. There's a report here by Transport and the Environment, which came out in 2019. Nitrogen oxide emissions from cruise ships in Europe heavily impact some particular cities, particularly places like Southampton and Barcelona. I tried to find some statistics for Avonmouth. I haven't been able to do so, but Southampton and Barcelona really get it in the neck. It's about 15% of the nitrogen oxide issued by Europe's passenger car fleet in a year. And if any of you are interested in looking further into nitrogen oxide emissions from cruise ships, there's a very good site called the Geeky Explorer, which is on this slide, partly covered by the drop-down thing, but definitely worth having a look at. The IMO is trying to regulate the emissions from nitrogen oxides. And particularly they are introducing much tougher requirements about controlling the emissions of nitrogen oxide from vessels which are built after the 1st of January 2016. So, there's a lot of vessels in operation built before that date. And when they are operating in what are called emission control areas, and certain areas have been designated as emission control areas where you have to use fuel which is going to be emitting less, first of all, less sulfur dioxide, but also less nitrogen oxide. And what we got until recently from the IMO was parts of the North America and the Caribbean Sea. And from the 1st of January this year, the Baltic Sea and the North Sea have been added. They have already actually been subject to an EU special. I'm losing my. Well, it's like an ECA, but it's called an SCA. The EU, it's a recurring pattern that the EU is regulating often in advance of what the IMO is doing. This is actually, I think this is a picture, or this is another polluting. This is just to sort of illustrate the amount of pollution which comes out of a funnel of of a cruise ship, there are other pollutants that do exist. And one of the things which we're only starting to become aware of is something called black carbon. And black carbon is not a very desirable thing. And it's actually, you get more black carbon when you're using these lower sulfur dioxide fuels. So, you try and control pollution from one gas, but then the way in which the new fuel is made, so you get rid of sulfur content, means that you have a problem with something else. And then, of course, there's methane, something which is due to methane is something which you get with vessels which are using LNG, liquid nitrogen gas, as part of their fuel. Can shipping decarbonize? I mean, I've mentioned speed caps. That should be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by between 20 and 30%, but we're going to need to do a lot more. I mean, is there the technical ability to go to different fuels? There are various possibilities. Hydrogen fuel cells tend, in my view, to be the most promising contender for replacing the current system of, you've got internal combustion engines running on fuel oil and diesel oil. How do you like your hydrogen? So do you want it brown or black or grey? So in other words, it's made by the electrolysis process, and that requires energy. And it's got, the brown or black hydrogen is made by using fossil fuels. Well, that just seems a way of shifting the CO2 emissions onshore. What about blue hydrogen? Sounds a bit nicer. Blue hydrogen is where you invest in carbon capture. So you're using fossil fuels to manufacture hydrogen through electrolysis, but you are somehow going to capture and store the obnoxious carbon dioxide which is emitted during that process. There is current research, which I think Nikki actually just sent me a link this morning, suggesting that actually is going to be very expensive. The best thing is, of course, green hydrogen, which is where hydrogen is made out of electricity supplied by renewables, renewable energy. And at the moment, there probably isn't enough renewable power to service the world's fleets, but things are changing. Solar is becoming more and more a player. There was, I think, places like Chile, where they got a lot of sun, particularly in their desert areas. They're going to sort of put lots of photovoltaics cells there, and they're going to use solar power, and they're going to sort of start generating to create green hydrogen. So the other hydrogen could be used either as actual fuel, or you can use it to create electricity on a ship by way, basically analogous to a battery. Now, there are some developments going on here. I think some ferries are going to be, I think there may even be one ferry which I think is running on the Rhine, which runs on green hydrogen through a fuel cell. But a lot of scaling up is going to need to be done to have what are called powertrains, the bit of kit which is actually going to be the fuel cell and work like a battery and get a reaction between hydrogen and oxygen to create the electricity. There's a lot of scaling up which is going to need to be done if you're going to get container ships to be able to run through hydrogen fuel cells. But that's not to say it can't be done. And there is active research going in by some shipping lines into doing just that. And one of the big players in the hydrogen fuel cell area is a company called Ballard, and I'm on their mailing list and get periodic alerts as to what's going on there. Another possibility is sails. I mean, this is what we used to do until the 1870s and the 1880s. And indeed, Renault, back in 2018, said that they were going to commission a car carrier running on wind power through sails. The problem with sails is speed. Most big ships will run at about 22 knots. You probably have to halve that if you're going through sails. The other possibility is liquid nitrogen gas, and the problem there is, although it may be easy to adapt ships to use it, is methane slip. So you've got a problem with another greenhouse gas being emissioned, creating emissions at some way between the creation of the fuel and its use in the ship. Rather flippantly, I've put hot air from the IMO as another possible fuel, and there we are. We're airborne with it, but perhaps not for shipping. Slow steaming, I've already mentioned that. That is a very good immediate way of reducing carbon emissions from CO2 emissions from existing ships. Other things which can be done, electrifying the docks, so that when you are a ship, whether you're a cargo ship or whether you are a cruise ship, instead of using diesel to keep the lights on, you plug in to an electricity facility in the port, and hopefully that will be powered by renewable energy. And indeed, there's a new competition being announced in the UK with a deadline tomorrow. So if any of you got any bright ideas about the development of electrification of the docks in this way, you've got 24 hours to submit your application for the competition. But this is being taken seriously. There are some ports, I think Los Angeles does it to some extent, and I think there's a Swedish port which has this facility. Its technical name is cold ironing. I don't know where that comes from, but it means plugging in to the landside electrical system rather than supplying electricity from burning diesel oil. So, and another possibility has been argued, well, maybe bigger ships would be a better thing to do. That's a possibility, and I can't resist it given what's happened. This is what's recently happened with one of our current ultra-large container ships. It's got stuck in the Suez Canal. The Ever Given turns into the Ever Stuck. Hopefully that will resolve itself fairly soon. Now, forget the IMO for a moment. Things have been happening in the EU which are very interesting. The EU introduced different fuel reporting measures from the IMO in 2015. They had a regulation called the Monitoring, Reporting and Verification Regulation. And then in December 2019, this lady, Ursula von der Leyen, the new head of is it the president of the EU? Yeah, I think that's the right term. The one who replaced Juncker. She came up with the Green New Deal. And in the Green New Deal, there was a proposal that the EU's scheme for emissions trading should be extended so that international shipping was brought within it. And due to the wonders of Zoom, I've completely obscured Jutta Paulus' face here. But Jutta Paulus is the person who came up with a report in January 2020, putting quite a bit of flesh about how you could alter the 2015 regulation, and you could, first of all, include shipping into the emissions trading scheme, and that would cover any shipping going into and out of EU ports. And effectively, your CO2 emissions are going to cost you. So what was then proposed is international ships coming in and out of EU ports should reduce their annual average CO2 emissions by at least 40% by 2030 over a 2018 baseline. They also called that methane and other greenhouse gases should also be included in this. So that's actually a recognition that it's not just CO2, and particularly pointing out methane. Better supply of shoreside electricity, more cold ironing. Establishing an ocean fund. So for an 8-year period, you would have a fund which was financed by auctioning off the allowances under the ETS to make and you'd use that fund to make ships more energy efficient, to support investment in innovative technologies and infrastructure, particularly alternative fuel and green ports. And there'd also be 20% of the revenues for protecting, restoring, and efficiently managing marine ecosystems impacted by global warming. And some people have suggested, well, it's going to be very difficult for ships to actually participate in the emissions trading system. And there is a proposal that actually you could opt instead just to pay some money into the ocean fund instead. And I think that's probably what would happen. But it's going to mean it's going to cost you. And one way you can reduce your CO2 emissions, if you're worried about this, is slow steaming. Now, this, the EU is a big organization. It has got 27 states. It used to be 28. And there's a lot of consumers in the EU. There's a lot of shipping going into the EU ports to bring us all the things we like our iPads and our clothes. A lot of clothes will probably come in through containers. It's going to be quite difficult to avoid this. But what about the UK? EU member, ex-EU member, used to be number 28. Well, a few days ago, in the Bloomberg newsletter, a colleague of mine at Swansea who subscribes to it said, have you seen that Robert Courts, who is the minister responsible for shipping, has said, we've got our own emissions trading scheme now that we've left the EU, and we may include shipping in it. I note the word may. And I would ask people to remember, the UK is hosting COP26 in the autumn in Glasgow. And I think one of the things, action points, which I might suggest at the end of today, is for people to keep up the pressure on their MPs to make sure that the UK actually does include international shipping in its parallel emissions trading scheme in the way that the EU looks like it's going to do. Because where we've got in the EU is that the EU Parliament has approved the necessary amendments to this regulation. There's a sort of general talking process which is going on at the moment called the trilogue. I'm not enough of an EU lawyer to be able to tell you what happens on that, but it's likely we're going to get some regulation arising by the end of this year, which probably will come into effect on the 1st of January of next year. And then ships going in and out of the EU are going to have to cough up money based on their CO2 emissions. That's going to be a real incentive for them to do something about reducing that. So I'm going to just see where we've got to. Dorian, how am I doing for time? Have I still got a little time left?
Yeah, no, by all means, take another 9 minutes or so. Yeah, I'd say that would be good.
Yeah, okay. The second aspect which I was going to look at is the greenhouse gas costs of all this imported stuff which is coming through to us through international shipping. I'm actually going to sort of focus on a few products which get imported, which have quite an adverse effect on the environment and are contributors to global warming, which we may not be particularly aware of. It's deforestation. It's thought that deforestation amounts to about 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's far more than the 2.7% of international shipping. And in particular, you are getting a lot of this type of thing happening in Brazil, in the Amazon rainforest, and in the Cerrado, where land is being cleared like this so that you can grow soya to feed domestic farm animals, and that soya will be coming in to the UK. There we are. That's one of the things which the soya goes into. It goes into a cow, and a cow goes into your burger. A large proportion goes for animal feed. About a third of the 2.5 million tons which we import into the UK comes from Brazil, and just 14% of the total imports are certified as deforestation free. Then there's palm oil. It makes things bind better, apparently. Therefore, it's very good, not just for food, like pizzas and donuts. It goes into nut butters and cosmetics. It goes into shampoos, deodorants, toothpaste. There we are. But the trouble is, you know, to create palm oil in the forests of Indonesia, you have to get rid of some of the forests. So that will have another effect on increasing greenhouse gas emissions. You're cutting down forests, cutting down the carbon sinks, which to some extent can mitigate the effects of all this CO2 emissions. Now, unfortunately, you can't quite see this rather wonderful thing of high fashion. You can just see the outlines of it. It is, you know, it's quite something. But that then translates into the fashion industry. And the fashion industry is called fast fashion, relies on a very rapid turnover of styles. You know, we are encouraged to be great consumers of our fashion, except for people like me who like to wear the same clothes for as long as they can get away with it. Fashion apparently accounts for around 10% of greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. And an interesting statistic is with polyester, 70 million barrels of oil a year are used to make polyester fibers in our clothes. So that is another polluting impact. And there's also some human costs. The fashion industry supply chains lead back to factories in Bangladesh and South Asia. And this is just an unfortunate reminder of what happened in 2013 with the collapse of the Rana Plaza building in Bangladesh, which was a building which had a lot of textile factories in, a lot of heavy machinery, and basically the floors couldn't take the weight of all the machinery, and the building collapsed, and there was a dreadful loss of human life. So what can we do? Reuse and repair. I mean, that again is something the EU is stressing in its approach to the Green Deal. It wants to have more reuse and repair. Shall we ask ourselves, do I really need to upgrade to an iPhone 13? How about wearing the clothes that I buy and keep wearing them? Buying less, buying local. It sounds like I'm asking you to bring down the capitalist system, which depends on more and more consumption, but I make no comment on that. Also, be aware of the greenhouse gas footprint of what we buy, and this is something I'm really trying to look into, but I'm pretty awful at it at the moment, but I'm trying to do better. There are various pieces of information: the Better Cotton Initiative, the Global Organic Textile Standard, there's the Rainforest Foundation UK Palm Oil Guide, and there's a little thing called the Boycott app, which is quite useful. But my final takeaway is lobby your MP to press the legislation for the UK adopting a parallel emissions trading scheme, which includes shipping and making it operate in parallel with the EU's scheme. And that's going to be particularly useful this year because of our hosting of COP. We've got the ability to embarrass the government. So I think that I can leave it there, and I'm now going to stop my sharing, and I think Dorian will then present me with some questions, which I hope I can answer.
It's great. Thank you so much for that, Simon. That was really interesting stuff. Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that 12 months on, maybe from when we initially had you booked, or however long it has been, I'm glad we were able to make this happen. So huge thanks for being here tonight. Just before we move on to questions, I know sometimes people, they come to the talk, they leave before the questions really start. So I'll just give another quick plug. In the chat right now, I have put the link to join the West Bristol Climate Action mailing list, which is going to be the new group that is forming out of Clifton Climate Action and the BCR Energy Group. I've also put a link to our joint PayPal link. It's on the screen in front of you now if you're just watching. PayPal.me/Clifton Climate Action. Before I had to do a whole complicated thing where I split the money evenly and it was all kind of fiddly, but now they're going to be the same group with the same bank account, so all the money will go to this new super group that we form, and helps us keep putting on talks like this. We think these talks, we would love it if you could stick in £2, £3, £5 if you really enjoyed tonight's talk, if you found it really interesting. If you can't afford it, absolutely don't worry about it. If you can afford it and you really enjoyed tonight's talk, if you stick in a tenner, then it's like you've paid for yourself and you've also paid for somebody else, and that would be absolutely incredible. And E30, oh my God, we'll love you forever. Yes, all of our other links and things are on the screen there. Let's get to a few of these questions. Caroline asks quite a simple one, Simon, which I think is a fair one. Why do ships leave all their lights on at night? I assume she means in docks rather than when they're plugging through the water. Is this something you're aware of, and can you shine any light on the subject?
Okay, that's a very good question. I mean, obviously, when they're going through the water, it's probably useful for safe navigation for that to be on. I don't know. I suppose you've got the crew living on them. So, for a while, I mean, the crew would presumably like to have lights on. I once heard, though, that you kept the lights on because it was better for light bulb. Otherwise, turning light bulbs on and off, the light bulbs didn't last as long. This may be apocryphal, but there was something about changing light bulbs which made it better to keep the lights on all the time rather than turn them off at night.
I mean, this
is completely unscientific.
If that is true, I think that's something we'd all like to know about. But, yeah, I've never heard that about light bulbs before. Caroline, if you wanted to, Caroline says, same with oil rigs, all lit up at night. Yeah, I guess it's probably just because there are people living on them, I suppose.
I think aeroplanes might also want to see, maybe aeroplanes need to see them. I don't know if they're flying particularly low. Right.
Yeah, Nikki makes the point that when
so,
comparing the energy consumption associated with lighting compared to, propelling the ship and the bunker fuel and everything, the lighting is kind of a small problem on the grand scheme of things. But I guess they probably would use that as an excuse for why it's fine for them to keep the lights on. But, we all try and turn off our lights at home. So, anyway.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Turn them off.
Yeah, please. Just one other thing, actually, I should have said this right before I started the Q&A, but you mentioned at the end there sort of palm oil and textiles, fast fashion, all those sorts of things. It's kind of amazing, actually, because our last talk 2 weeks ago was on palm oil. So if anyone who's here today wasn't at that talk is now on the Bishopston, Cotham and Redland Energy Group YouTube channel. You should be able to just find it by searching, BCR or Clifton and palm oil. And we did one on fast fashion at the end of last year. I think it was in November sometime. Again, the video is online. Yeah, please do look those up if you want more information on any of those subjects. Next question. This is another one from Caroline. I saw a model of a future Korean ship in a Danish museum, which looked like the deck was covered in horizontal wind power rotors. How is this technology progressing, or did I misunderstand it? Is this something you're familiar with?
Yes, I think this is one of the things which has been looked at as the Renault thing. I think is almost entirely going to be sail. Maybe it's going to be 90% sail powered and a bit of extra energy. But you can, by having horizontal wind rotors, you can use those as auxiliary power. And so that will contribute, you'll still be running to some extent on fuel oil, but you won't be using so much of it because you're getting extra power from the wind through these rotors. So yes, that is definitely a development which is interesting and will probably actually bear some fruit in the future.
Nikki's put a little comment saying that, I think that's pronounced Maersk, did a trial with Maersk, right? Did a trial with wind turbines and found it cut their use of bunker fuel by about 10%. I believe all sorts of trials going on with different designs. So ships themselves can become more fuel efficient, and we can use them less. So there is room for improvement.
Well, it's interesting that there is somebody at Swansea University who is in the engineering department called Charlie Dunhill, and he's on a project which is going to be, I think it's using excess heat energy from the vessel, and I think it's going to be a small hydrogen fuel cell, but it's got the capacity, it should have the capacity to reduce fuel consumption by about 25%. I'm afraid, technically, once upon a time, I sort of understood what he was doing, but I can't. But he's definitely doing something, and I think he one of the people who are interested in this is the Royal Navy. So these sort of developments are going on all over the place, which is fantastic. But we don't have actually a great deal of time.
No, that is very much the problem with a lot of new, hopefully planet-saving technologies. Julie asks, are there any legal challenges by popular tourist destinations that get a lot of cruise ships to stop them turning up and polluting the air so badly? Are you aware of any of those?
I don't think there are any legal challenges. No, because port states have autonomy as to what ships they allow into their ports, so that's okay under the. So you could actually say we don't want you in, or we can, or you can impose whatever restrictions you want. The problem is, you probably want their money.
Yes. Yes.
I'm thinking also of my wife keeps asking me, why doesn't Venice just say, ban cruise ships? I mean, I think it's probably because of the money.
Yeah, live by the tourism, die by the tourism, I suppose.
I'm afraid so. Yeah, I was actually thinking of getting one of the slides of a picture of a cruise ship, virtually, sort of very near San Marco and very big. But I went for something with a bit of dirty smoke coming out instead.
So, a very good question here from Mark. How do the CO2 emissions from shipping compare to air freight?
Oh goodness, no, gosh, no. Of course, air is the other thing which is outside Kyoto and Paris, and I think air is under the ICAO. I think air is worse for CO2 emissions than shipping.
Yes,
but I haven't got the statistic.
I think
you
I've
get
heard
more
something.
because you got.
Sorry, Simon. There's a bit of a delay on my internet not being very good. I think what I've heard is that air overall is larger than the stats you quoted for shipping. I don't know if air freight is the largest part of all air travel. So I don't know. I'll defer to you, of course.
It's difficult to say because I don't know the statistics, and I know that quite a bit of air freight will sometimes go with passenger flights as well. I've always thought that actually shipping probably was better with, whether it's freight or or passenger, it was probably better with CO2 emissions than air, but I stand to be corrected on that. The problem with air is, if you think shipping's got a problem with getting alternative fuels, I think air has got an even bigger problem.
Yeah. No, definitely no chance of sail-powered planes anytime soon. Whereas I suppose we all know that sail-powered boats can work. It's just unideal for a number of reasons.
Yes.
Another one from Julie. Are there any indications of changes in consumer behaviour, particularly in the UK, in terms of buying less stuff from overseas?
Gosh, a lot of stuff you have to buy from overseas. I mean, if you want your iPad, it's going to come from China, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure about that. One interesting thing which I did read about in one of the reports is that long-haul international shipping may actually start to decline in the next few years when you get automated production centers for goods happening in developed world countries. So instead of Apple having to sort of subcontract and get its computers made in China, you open a completely automated factory in the US, and you just do it there. That is a possible development, part of the general development of getting rid of human beings and replacing with automation. But that's a thing for another topic.
It's just gone past. We've got 3 more questions here, and unless anything else comes in that is a really hot one, I think we might leave it there. We'll get to these last 3. Do you have any info on how the shipping industry is avoiding IMO sulfur regulations? I have read that they are collecting their emissions in scrubbers, dumping at sea. I haven't read anything about this lately. Any info?
I think that's the problem with open loop scrubbers, and certainly if you've got a closed loop scrubber, that shouldn't be happening, because you just go and offload it on shore, and somebody hopefully will then dispose of it properly. There are anti-dumping regulations, but I think the nature of an open loop scrubber is it's got to go somewhere, and the sea is about the only place it can go. And I think that's a bit of a loophole with the sulfur regulations. But there is all sorts of complicated economic calculations. But funnily enough, it's sort of this thing about sulfur regulations and stuff is the industry was obsessed with it, and it seems to have gone quiet as a topic of interest.
Okay, two more. Actually, I'm going to throw in one more. So we have got 3 questions left, but hopefully the third one will be
that's great.
A fairly quick one. I'm going to unplug that. Interested in this is a really interesting question, actually. Interested in the impact changes to shipping regulation could have on the price of food in the UK and food prices. Currently, we import around 30% from the European Union and around 20% from the rest of the world. Do you think that new EU regulations affect food prices?
If you're importing food and you are effectively paying a contribution the carrier is paying a contribution into a carbon fund through some ETS, that would inevitably raise food prices. Now, rest of the world, it depends on what the UK does as whether it is going to have an ETS. There's nothing wrong with growing more food in the UK. And it's a radical idea. I mean, there's quite a lot of things which we can actually grow here, and
local, seasonal, organic, as Nicky is always banging the drum for. Absolutely. If it becomes more expensive, those prices inevitably get passed on to the consumer, the final consumer. But we could well see international food going up in price, but I guess we shall find out. So, ultimate question. Presumably, one of the things we need the public to understand is how very disastrous fast steaming is. So buying shipped in fresh produce is not great. Uses much more fuel than slow steaming.
I think that's an excellent comment, and why why do you need to have fast steaming, and why is it that Renault isn't concerned about speed? It doesn't matter if your cars are going to take longer to get to the European market. It does matter with refrigerated goods and refrigerated food. I think there is a question there as to what should be done. I mean, obviously there are the countries which export that food. I mean, that's pretty important to them. But from a point of view of shipping's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, we don't want fast steaming.
No,
it really does, ramp up the fuel consumption and thereby the greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. Simple. Okay. It's sort of serendipitous that we would have our talk on shipping this week of all weeks, when the biggest thing on my Twitter timeline is about shipping. Can you just tell me how I should feel about what's going on in Suez right now? Because my first instinct is to laugh, because someone has managed to get a giant tanker stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal and it's holding up 20% of international shipping. And my first instinct is to find that quite funny, but I'm sure if I actually think about it, it's deeply sad and very bad. Could you just tell me kind of how I should be interpreting this bit of news, please?
Well, we've been here before. Ships got bombed in the 1956 and 1973 Arab-Israeli conflicts, and actually the Suez Canal was rather clogged up for quite a while. I mean, and people were having to, for quite a while, going around the Cape on their voyages rather than going down the Suez Canal. So, yeah, it has been, we have been there before, and we can cope with it. There may be, I think there will be higher prices if it doesn't get sorted out soon. It makes me wonder perhaps why these very large ships are actually allowed to go through the Suez Canal. I'm also thinking about what's the position with the Panama Canal. I think there must be, the salvage operators must be sort of scratching their head, wondering the best way to do it. I suspect it will get resolved.
Yes.
I mean, the worst you can do is blow the ship up in the end. But if you can't, if it is stuck, but that would, you obviously take off the containers and take off the crew, and you might, and you might have to have controlled demolition to solve the problem. But I think they will manage it. But let us see.
And in terms of the carbon emissions, presumably there are lots of ships now just sort of idling near Suez going, let us through soon. They pumping out carbon right now, and is there?
Well, they won't be sailing. They'll be waiting. So they won't be using any fuel oil.
Okay.
They'll be using diesel oil to keep the lights on. But that's still sort of emitting. They're still idly emitting greenhouse gases. And they may have to start going on, if this lasts for much longer, they may have to sort of do a reverse and go longer journeys around the Cape of Good Hope. And that obviously will bump up emissions because you're going to be using more fuel.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that, Simon. It just it occurred to me while you were speaking that I've got a shipping expert right here, and the biggest story in the world is about shipping. I think that will bring us to the end of the talk. Thank you so much, Simon, for coming here tonight and for speaking so well. Thank you to everyone who has attended and has posted such wonderful questions in the chat. We're not going to have a talk in the first week or second week of April. We are going to have one towards the end of April. I am still trying to actually lock in a speaker for this one. We're hoping it's going to be on green cleaning products and green cleaning practices. Actually finding someone to speak on that is proving a little tricky, but news on that will be available to anyone, especially if they join the mailing list. There's a link in the top of the chat box for anyone who's currently in the meeting. We will put links to that in our next news email, so join the news. And if you're on either of the other news ones, you will get another link to that at some point. And a reminder, please do donate via PayPal if you've enjoyed tonight's talk. It really helps us keep going, especially with so much changing right now. We could really use your support. If you don't want to use PayPal, by the way, our email addresses are at the bottom of the page. Send me an email. I'll send you our bank details. You can just do a direct bank transfer. And yeah, so just one final time, thank you to Simon. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you again soon for another talk.